Transgenderism is a mental health disorder. That is what Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy declared at the second Republican debate in California. The billionaire entrepreneur said it's not compassionate to affirm a kid's confusion. That is cruelty. Ramaswamy claimed that more than 50% of kids with gender dysphoria have considered suicide. He recalled encountering two young women who later said they had regrets about their gender-affirming surgeries.
I think that these treatments need to be banned for people under the age of 18. And for both adults and children who are struggling with gender dysphoria, the standards of care need to be revised because they're trying to completely remove the age restrictions on these treatments and to allow basically anybody through the system to transition as they please without really any previous diagnosis or a proper psychological evaluation.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm thinking about doing. I mean, I've gotten the amount of pushback I've gotten when I've said that actually we would ban these surgeries, really, body-altering surgeries and chemical castration and puberty blockers.
And I agree
kids under the age
Chloe.
of 18. You agree with that?
I agree with her. At the very least, I think it should be completely banned for people under the age of 18. I just don't think that people that young, even over 18 into your 20s, I mean, it caught me at 18 and I still wasn't able to make the proper decision. I think that the whole gender ideology is harmful, and everything it touches, it destroys.
Based on just the backlash that I've seen in the world I'm in, I can only imagine what the two of you have been through. What's been the reaction of the LGBTQIA+ community, etc., to your stories and you sharing your stories? What's been the reception you've gotten?
I mean, from the very beginning of my detransition, just talking about my experience has attracted a lot of hatred from this community that I once was a part of.
In what ways does that manifest itself? I mean,
I've had people harassing me. I've had people even making like different accounts to like stalk me across my social media on, and I've been told things like, "Well, you didn't deserve to have people care enough about you to let you go through these treatments. You stole resources from us, and you need to stop talking about your story because you're harming the real transgender community."
While many may be taken aback by the words of the political novice, Vivek Ramaswamy has consistently taken an unapologetic stance on many issues, and one of them is LGBTQ+ rights.
Now, here's the other thing here's another hypocrisy at the heart of that. Part of the argument for the so-called trans empathy movement, the one that's actually creating more gender dysphoria in our schools, it's like you can measure in COVID-19, they use this number, the R squared. It's how quickly a virus spreads. Well, actually, it turns out this is like epidemic level proportions when in a classroom, one kid identifies as being a gender different than their biological sex. That spreads faster in the classroom than COVID-19. So if this is a mental health condition that is such a source of suffering, why in our schools are we going out of our way to create more of it? That's part of what's underlying that dilemma. And then there's the piece that you mentioned, which is hiding it from the parents, because that's what the heart of that case is about. And part of the argument, and this part, there's truth to it. Children who believe that they're born in the wrong body, that their gender doesn't match their biological sex, that means they're suffering from a mental health condition. Transgenderism is a mental health condition. And it is true that there's a higher rate of suicide and self-harm amongst these kids. That's the whole argument for why there was more empathy needed in the classroom. Yet, why would it be that for a condition where there's a greater likelihood of self-harm among that kid, that you otherwise wouldn't let the parent know about that very risk? So the contradictions abound. It actually has very little to do with empathy or compassion. The compassionate thing to do to a kid isn't to affirm their cruelty and to do it in hiding. That's not compassion, that's cruelty. But it is a form of cruelty that's a way of exerting, I think, a lot of power and dominion and control and punishment. That's really what this agenda is about. And I think a lot of parents today are left being on the receiving end of that power, dominion, control, and punishment. And thanks to you and thanks to your hard work as well, we're not going to stand by quietly and watch that happen.
The 38-year-old has proposed that schools must inform parents if their children change their gender identity. He argues that parents have a fundamental right to know about their children's decisions regarding their gender identity.
This week, the New Hampshire House voted down a bill, a parental rights bill, that would require schools to tell parents if their kids at school have changed their gender identity. This should not be complicated. This should not be controversial. And yet we live in a moment where New Hampshire's House just voted it down. This is a problem that in many cases does have to be addressed locally, at the state level. There are things a U.S. president can do, however. One of the things I've said is that the U.S. Department of Education is partly responsible for this problem across our country. They tell schools across the nation that they can't get federal funds unless they adopt these toxic racial and gender ideologies. I've said I would end that, not by tinkering around the edges of the U.S. Department of Education. When you have a bureaucracy that runs that deep, you can't reform it. You have to shut it down. And I've committed to shutting down the U.S. Department of Education and then putting that money back in the hands of parents to fund underfunded school choice programs across the country, giving parents the ability to send their kids to a right school, a school that's right for them, not a school that indoctrinates them or their families. That being said, a lot needs to be done at the state level as well. And though I'm disappointed with what happened in New Hampshire this week, this doesn't have to be the end of the road. I have confidence in the legislators and the people of New Hampshire to still get this right. But it's going to take more of us to be courageous in talking openly about what was once obvious in our country, but sadly has even become controversial.
Vivek Ramaswamy strongly opposes any external influence on how minors perceive their biological sex.
So I think it is something deeper than just what meets the eye. I think it's the loss of conviction and self-confidence itself. See, we used to believe in ourselves and who we really were. The analogy I sometimes use, Kathy's heard me say this on the road when we travel the campaign trail in Iowa at times. We're like a bunch of blind bats flying around in a cave, figuring out where we are. And the way a bat figures out where it is, it's blind. How does it figure it out? It sends out a sonar signal. Bounces off the wall of the cave, it comes back and it says, this is where I am. I think we human beings, we do the same thing. We send out a signal, it bounces off of things that are fixed, things that are true. Say my family, the two parents who brought me into this world, the two children who I brought into this world, with my wife, to whom I'm still married. That is real. That is true. That means something to me. That bounces back, it says, this is where I am. I believe in God. My faith is true. That bounces back. It tells me this is where I am. I'm a citizen of this nation, the United States of America, not some global citizen somewhere. I'm a citizen of this nation. That means something to me. That bounces back. It says, this is where I am. I work hard. I create something that doesn't exist in the world. That bounces back. It says, this is where I am. Well, what happens when those things disappear? Right? We send out these signals, and then nothing comes back. We're like those blind bats lost in a cave, left to wallow in our depression, our anxiety, our existential angst. And then what's the next best thing we turn to? Well, guess what? We have somebody else halfway across the Pacific realizes that we're going through this existential void as a country. Say, hey, why don't we exploit that with a modern version of the Opium War? We have synthetic materials coming from Wuhan, China. I'm not making this up. Wuhan, China sends the 4 synthetic materials needed to create synthetic fentanyl to Mexican drug cartels south of our own southern border, pumping that up across our southern border. We need to fix that. We can talk about how we're going to fix it. But I prefer to start with the root cause. It's a vacuum. It's a black hole of purpose and meaning and identity.
One of Vivek Ramaswamy's so-called 10 truths is that there are only 2 genders.
I'm proud to say that I have signed the Concerned Women for America Legislative Action Committee pledge. It was an easy pledge to sign, and I think a big part of why is that it's founded on truth. There are 2 sexes, period. And when someone identifies as a gender different from their biological sex, especially a kid, that is indicative of a mental health condition. The compassionate thing to do is not to affirm that confusion. That is not compassion. that is cruelty. It is cruelty to everyone. And I have pledged to actually protect women from this toxic expansion of definitions of gender, to say that women will be able to compete in sports as the law demands, that women will be able to carry out their functions, that the only people who actually are able to give birth to children are by definition women. Our country is founded on the truth. We should not apologize for the truth. That's what it means to be an American. And that's what it meant to me to sign this pledge.
Striking a conservative tone, Ramaswamy insists that a nuclear family is the best form of governance.
We're starting from a different point where, forget about the debate about pro-family policies. We have anti-family policies in this country, right? So we need to get that government out of the way. Let me teach you something about the 1960s, okay? Lyndon Johnson launched the greatest misnomer in political history when he called it the Great Society. It was the Awful Society, is actually what he unleashed, where they actually paid families, and he was supposedly in the name of helping back black families. A black family, by the way, 70% of black kids in the 1960s, over 70% were born into two-parent households. Right. All right, today it's less than 30%. Why? Because you get what you pay for. So they paid them more to actually have a single-parent household. That mom could make more, saying, I'm married to Uncle Sam instead of married to you. Well, why the heck do I have you around? Well, I don't really blame them for making, we've induced people to make economic decisions. They make the decisions in part that they're incentivized to make. You get what you pay for. So I think the low-hanging fruit is get the government the heck out of the way with these anti-family policies, and then we restore the best-known governing institution to mankind. We conservatives, we do say, and I'm with you, I say that we don't trust the big government. When we say in God we trust, in the bottom of our coins, let me translate that for you. It means in government we distrust. That's what it means. But the best known governing institution to mankind, it's not just that we're against big government. We're in favor of that best known form of governance, the two-parent stable family household.
Vivek Ramaswamy's stance on gender and LGBTQ+ issues align with the broader American divide. He represents the majority of Republicans who see gender as fixed.
But that does not mean that we will allow, first of all, kids to be tainted by a top-down dogma. So I would ban any genital mutilation or chemical castration in kids under the age of 18. This is not an unfamiliar idea. There's not a state in this union that allows you to get a tattoo by the age of 18, because we don't want kids to make a permanent body-altering change that they will later regret in life. Actually, last time I was here in New Hampshire, I met two young women, both of whom underwent chemical intervention and surgical intervention, who now regret it. One of them, Chloe, when she was 13. This is a travesty. Right? This has nothing to do with freedom. Freedom applies to fully grown adults, not to kids. And the second thing is, you can live your life the way you want to, but we're not going to change our language.
While Vivek Ramaswamy's views have made him a polarizing figure in American politics, he has also become very hard to ignore. He has captured the attention and support of conservative and next-generation voters, just like Donald Trump did in 2016.